I've lived long enough to know that the people who change your life don't always arrive the way you expect. Sometimes they show up soaked to the bone, carrying nothing but a worn-out bag and a quiet kind of strength you don't recognize until much later. I watched it happen once, on a night when the sky turned black and the rain wouldn't stop. The stagecoach was late. Daniel Sawyer stood alone on the depot platform, hat pulled low, watching lightning split the valley sky. When the coach door finally swung open, a woman stepped down into ankle-deep mud. No trunk, no boxes, just a carpet bag clutched to her chest. One seam splitting at the corner. Rain ran down her face. She didn't wipe it. She looked straight at him, not shy, not pleading, and something in those eyes made him take a step back, like she'd already seen the worst the world could offer and decided it wouldn't break her. "Mr. Sawyer." He nodded once. "I'm Faith." She didn't offer her hand. "I reckon you weren't expecting this much weather." He wasn't expecting any of this. If this story's already drawing you in, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from tonight. And if you've been enjoying these tales without subscribing, we'd be grateful if you joined our little community. The wagon seat was hard, and the rain drummed steady on the canvas overhead. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. The woman beside him sat with her carpet bag on her lap, both hands wrapped around it like it might fly away. She smelled like dust and old train smoke. Underneath that, something fainter, lye soap. Maybe, the kind that came cheap. "The children," she said after a mile of nothing. "What are their names?" "Ellie, Samuel." "How old?" "8. Sure." She nodded. The rain filled the silence between them. "Their mother," she started. "Fever." The word came out harder than he meant. He didn't look at her. She didn't ask anything else after that. Just watched the trees go by, dark shapes bleeding into darker sky. Her hands stayed still on the bag. She didn't fidget, didn't try to fill the quiet with chatter, the way some women did. He wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. The homestead appeared through the rain smaller than he remembered. Somehow, lamplight glowed in the front window. Ellie's doing. The girl had taken to lighting it every night since her mother passed, like she was guiding something home. He pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. By the time he came around to offer his hand, Faith was already in the mud, her worn boots sinking 2 inches into the muck. The children stood on the porch. Ellie had her arm around Samuel, chin lifted, shoulders square. The boy's thumb hovered near his mouth. Faith walked toward them, stopped at the bottom step, crouched down in the mud, heedless of her skirt dragging in it. "You must be Samuel." The boy ducked behind his sister's dress, one eye peeking out. Faith didn't reach for him, didn't move at all, just stayed there, low and still, rain dripping off the edge of her bonnet. "I had a brother once," she said. "He liked to hide too, said it meant he got to decide when to be found." Samuel's thumb dropped from his mouth. He stepped out from behind Ellie one step, then another, and stood at the edge of the porch, looking down at this strange woman kneeling in the rain. Daniel watched from the wagon. His daughter's face had gone strange, not suspicious anymore, something worse, hopeful. The smell of coffee woke him. Daniel lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling beams. Gray light leaked through the window. The rooster hadn't crowed yet, but someone was moving in his kitchen. and the floorboards creaked in a rhythm that wasn't his. He pulled on his trousers and shirt, didn't bother with boots, padded down the hall in his socks. Faith stood at the stove. Her hair was pinned up, a flour sack towel tucked into her apron strings. The enamel coffee pot, the blue one with the chipped spout Margaret had bought in town 3 winters back, sat steaming on the edge of the iron. Biscuits browned in the Dutch oven. The kitchen looked the same. Every pot, every pan, every worn spot on the table. But something had shifted. He couldn't name it. She turned. "Morning, Mr. Sawyer. You're up early?" "Habit." She poured coffee into a tin cup and set it on the table. "Children still sleeping." He nodded, sat down. The coffee was strong, darker than he made it. He drank it anyway. Faith moved back to the stove, cracking eggs into the skillet. The sizzle filled the silence. Outside, the rooster finally crowed late. As always, Daniel watched her work. Economy in every motion, no wasted steps. She'd done this before, many times. Footsteps on the stairs. Ellie appeared in the doorway, Samuel behind her, rubbing his eyes with one fist. The girl's gaze swept the kitchen, the stranger at her mother's stove, the biscuits in her mother's pan. "Sit down," Daniel said. "Breakfast." Ellie sat. Samuel climbed up beside her. Faith set plates in front of them, eggs, biscuits, a smear of butter. The children ate in silence. Daniel chewed without tasting. "Our mama made better eggs." Daniel's fork stopped. Ellie stared at Faith across the table, chin lifted. Faith nodded. "I expect she did." The girl blinked. Whatever she'd been bracing for, that wasn't it. She looked down at her plate and didn't say anything else. After the children finished and went outside to feed the chickens, Daniel stayed at the table. Faith washed the dishes in the basin. Her back to him, steam rose around her hands. "We should talk terms," he said. She dried her hands on the towel, turned to face him. "All right. Cooking, mending, minding the children while I work." He ticked them off like items on a list. "Fair wage, paid monthly. You'll have the back room. Door stays closed at night." "That's reasonable. Any questions?" She hesitated. Just a flicker. There and gone. "One thing. If you'd allow it." He waited. "I'd like to teach them their letters. Ellie and Samuel both." She folded the towel, set it on the counter. "I don't mean to overstep, but if they can read anything, newspapers, deeds, contracts." Her eyes met his. Nobody cheats a man who reads, or a woman. Something passed across her face. Not quite a smile. "I learned that particular lesson, dear." Daniel's jaw tightened. The McGuffey's reader sat on the shelf by the window, dog-eared and dusty. Margaret's handwriting still marked the margins. She'd been teaching Ellie when the fever came. Their mother used to... He stopped. The words stuck in his throat like dry bread. Faith didn't fill the silence, didn't prompt, just stood there, hands folded, waiting. The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside, Samuel's laughter drifted through the window, thin and rare enough that Daniel turned his head toward the sound. "Fine," he said. "Letters, but nothing from the Bible." If she found that strange, she didn't show it, just nodded once, the same small nod she'd given on the porch the night she arrived. "Much obliged, Mr. Sawyer." He stood, grabbed his hat from the peg. "I'll be in the north field till supper." The door banged shut behind him. He didn't look back. Sunday came too fast. Daniel hitched the wagon at dawn, the way he used to. Same harness, same buckles, same mare stamping in the early chill. The children wore their church clothes, Ellie in the blue dress Margaret had sewn, Samuel in a shirt that was already too short in the sleeves. Faith appeared on the porch in a gray dress he hadn't seen before, plain cotton, mended at the collar. She'd done something different with her hair, pinned it higher. Maybe. He didn't know why he noticed. "You coming, Pa?" Ellie asked from the wagon bed. Daniel climbed up, took the reins. Faith settled on the bench beside him, a foot of space between them. The wagon lurched forward. The clapboard church rose white against the morning sky, its bell tower catching the first sun. Horses lined the rail. Men in wool vests stood in clusters, talking low. Women in cotton bonnets moved toward the doors, children trailing behind. Daniel pulled the wagon into the shade of the big oak and set the brake. "Ain't you coming in?" Samuel asked. "I'll wait here." Ellie opened her mouth to argue, probably, but Faith touched her shoulder. Light, brief. The girl's mouth closed. Faith climbed down, helped Samuel after her, straightened his collar, brushed dust from Ellie's skirt. They walked toward the church, the children between them. At the door, Faith paused, turned, looked back at Daniel sitting rigid on the wagon seat, reins still wrapped around his fists. The sun caught her face, threw half of it into shadow. She didn't wave him in, didn't call out, just nodded small, almost private, and walked inside. Daniel watched the door close behind her. His hands ached. He loosened his grip on the reins, one finger at a time. The leather had left red lines across his palms. Inside the church, the organ started up, a hymn he knew by heart, one Margaret used to hum while she cooked. The notes drifted through the closed doors, thin and far away. He pulled his hat lower and stared at the horses tied to the rail. A woman's voice cut through the quiet. "Daniel Sawyer, haven't seen you at service in 2 years." Mrs. Harmon stood at the edge of the shade, black dress buttoned to her throat, bonnet ribbons tight under her chin. Her eyes moved from him to the church door and back again. "That the woman your sister sent," she didn't wait for an answer. "Saw her come in with your children, bold as brass, walking right up the center aisle." Daniel said nothing. Mrs. Harmon stepped closer. The smell of camphor and old lavender drifted off her clothes. "Folks are talking, you know, a woman like that, showing up with nothing but a carpet bag, no family, no references." Her voice dropped. "No shame, either." From the look of it, Daniel's knuckles went white on the reins again. "What exactly," Mrs. Harmon asked, "do you know about her?" 6 weeks changed the shape of the days. Daniel noticed it first in the mornings. The coffee ready before the rooster crowed. Biscuits cooling on the windowsill. The children's clothes laid out clean, pressed with the flat iron Faith heated on the stove before dawn. He noticed it in the sounds. Samuel's voice, coming more often now, asking questions, laughing at things the chickens did. Ellie humming while she worked, a tune Daniel didn't recognize. The scratch of chalk on slate from the back room where Faith held lessons after breakfast. He noticed it in himself. the way he lingered at doorways, the way his boots slowed on the porch steps when he came in from the fields, the way his eyes found her across the room before he knew he was looking. Late summer pressed heavy on the valley. The tomatoes hung fat and red on their stakes. The corn stood taller than Samuel's head. Dust rose from the road every afternoon and settled on everything by nightfall. Daniel stood in the doorway of the back room, hat in hand, watching. Faith sat at the small table with Samuel on one side and Ellie on the other. The slate lay between them, covered in chalk letters. Samuel's tongue poked out the corner of his mouth as he concentrated. "See," Faith said, pointing. T. Samuel traced each letter with his finger. His lips moved silently. "Now, put them together." The boy's brow furrowed. His finger moved across the slate again, slower this time. C-A-T. He looked up. "Cat." Faith's whole face changed. Not a smile, exactly, something deeper. Something that reached her eyes and stayed there. "That's right, cat." Samuel grinned and turned toward the doorway. "Pa, I read cat." Daniel nodded. His throat had gone tight. He didn't trust his voice. Ellie tugged at Faith's sleeve. "Can you braid my hair the fancy way, like you did yesterday?" Faith glanced at Daniel quick, almost asking permission, then turned back to the girl. "After supper. We've still got sums to do." Ellie groaned, but picked up her chalk. Daniel put his hat back on and walked out to the field. The corn needed checking. The fence in the north pasture needed mending. There was always something that needed doing. He didn't look back at the house. The wagon appeared on the road just past noon. Daniel saw it from the field: black bonnet, black dress, straight spine, Mrs. Harmon. He set down his hoe and started walking toward the house. By the time he reached the porch, the woman was already inside. Her voice carried through the open window, high and sharp. "Just being neighborly, dear. Thought I'd see how you were settling in." Daniel stopped at the door. Through the gap, he could see Faith at the table, pouring coffee from the blue enamel pot. Mrs. Harmon sat across from her, eyes moving around the room like she was cataloging every crack in the plaster. "Much obliged for the visit," Faith said. Her voice was even. Her hands were steady on the pot. "Quite a change for you, I imagine, coming all this way." Mrs. Harmon accepted the cup without thanking her. "Where did you say you were from?" "Missouri." "And your people, where were they from?" Faith set the pot back on the stove. "East, originally, moved around considerable." Mrs. Harmon sipped her coffee. "Wandering folk, farming folk." Faith sat down across from her. "The land didn't always cooperate." Silence. The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside, a crow called from the cornfield. Mrs. Harmon set her cup down with a small click. "And your father, your mother?" "All passed, ma'am. I'm the last." "Convenient." Faith said nothing, reached for the pot, poured Mrs. Harmon more coffee she hadn't asked for. The older woman's eyes narrowed. "You understand, of course, that people talk. A woman arriving with nothing but a carpet bag, no family, no letters of reference." She paused. "No husband. I understand. And you don't find that troubling?" Faith's hands stayed folded on the table. Her face gave nothing away. "I find a lot of things troubling, Mrs. Harmon. What other people say about me ain't one of them." The silence stretched. Mrs. Harmon's fingers tightened on her cup. Daniel pushed the door open. Both women turned. "More coffee, Mrs. Harmon?" He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Or were you leaving?" The older woman stood. Her chair scraped against the floor. "I was just going." She gathered her shawl, her gloves, her dignity. At the door, she paused. "You should be more careful. Daniel, people remember things in a town like this. They remember everything." The door closed behind her. Her wagon wheels creaked down the road. Daniel looked at Faith. She hadn't moved from the table. "You didn't have to sit through that. Wasn't the worst conversation I've had this month." Something flickered at the corner of her mouth. Almost a smile. He sat down across from her. The chair was still warm from Mrs. Harmon. The coffee pot sat between them, steam rising thin and pale. "She'll be back," he said. "I know. She'll bring others. I know that too." Faith looked at him, steady, unblinking. "Does it bother you?" What she said, Daniel thought about the question. The clock ticked. The children's voices drifted from the back room, Samuel practicing his letters, Ellie correcting him. "No," he said finally. "I don't reckon it does." That evening, the heat broke. A breeze came up from the valley, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Daniel sat on the porch step, watching the fireflies blink in the tall grass. The children were in bed. The house was quiet. The door creaked behind him. Faith came out, drying her hands on her apron. She sat on the other end of the step, leaving space between them. They watched the fireflies in silence. "Mrs. Harmon asked about my people," Faith said finally. "I didn't tell her the whole truth." Daniel waited. "My pa died in Missouri, 18 months back." She picked at a thread on her sleeve. "I buried him myself. Couldn't afford the gravedigger's fee. Just me and a shovel and a piece of land that wasn't worth the sweat it took to work it." The fireflies blinked. The breeze moved through the corn. "I sold the farm for the stage ticket. The buyer knew I was desperate." Her voice stayed flat, matter of fact. "No pity in it. Paid me half what it was worth. I could have fought him, stayed and fought. But for what another season of watching crops fail and waiting for someone to come along." She looked at the darkening tree line. Her profile was sharp against the fading light. "I ain't good at waiting." Daniel thought about his own waiting. 2 years of it. 2 years of mornings that tasted like ash, and evenings that stretched too long, and a bed that was always cold on one side. "So, you answered my sister's advertisement," he said. "I answered every advertisement I could afford postage for." She almost smiled. "Yours was the only one that wrote back." The breeze carried the smell of coming rain. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled low and far away. "What did it say?" Daniel asked. "The letter. What did my sister tell you about me?" Faith was quiet for a moment. Her fingers stopped picking at the thread. "She said you were a good man who'd forgotten how to be happy." She looked at him. The fireflies blinked between them. "She said you needed someone who wouldn't give up on you." Daniel's chest tightened. He looked away, toward the fields, toward the dark shapes of the mountains on the horizon. "And what do you think?" The words came out rougher than he intended. "Now that you've been here 6 weeks, now that you've seen..." He stopped. He didn't know how to finish. Faith stood, brushed off her skirt. The door creaked as she pulled it open. "I think," she said quietly, "that your sister wasn't wrong." The door closed behind her. Daniel sat alone on the porch, the fireflies blinking in the darkness, the thunder rolling closer. Inside the house, a lamp went on in Faith's window. He watched it burn until the rain finally came. The garden stretched between the house and the fence line, rows of tomatoes and beans and squash baking in the early autumn heat. Daniel worked one end, pulling weeds, checking stakes. Faith worked the other, a wicker basket on her hip, filling it with tomatoes gone soft and red. They moved toward each other without meaning to. The rows converged near the middle, where the biggest plants grew, where the soil was richest and the sun hit longest. Daniel reached for a tomato at the same moment she did. Their fingers brushed. Both pulled back. The tomato dropped into the dirt, splitting open on impact, red flesh and seeds spilling across the dark earth. They stared at it. Faith laughed first. A short sound, almost surprised, like it had escaped without permission. She covered her mouth with one hand, but her eyes were bright above her fingers. Daniel bent down and picked up the ruined tomato. Juice ran between his fingers, warm from the sun. He tossed it toward the compost pile at the edge of the garden. "Wasted," he said. "Plenty more where that came from." Faith gestured at the vines heavy with fruit. "I ain't never seen tomatoes this big. Your soil must be good." "Margaret's doing. She worked this garden for years before." He stopped. The name had slipped out before he could catch it. Faith didn't flinch, just nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. She knew what she was doing. They went back to work, separate rows now. The space between them felt different than it had before. That night, Daniel lay awake in the dark, listening to the house settle around him. The creak of floorboards, the tick of the clock downstairs, and something else footsteps, light and careful, moving from Faith's room to the kitchen and back again. He told himself he wasn't listening for her. He told himself that 3 times before he finally slept. Ellie's fever came on fast. One moment she was fine, helping Faith clear the supper dishes. The next she was pale and swaying, her hand pressed to her forehead, her eyes glassy and unfocused. Daniel caught her before she fell. Her skin burned against his palms. His heart slammed against his ribs. "Get her to bed," Faith said, already moving, already calm. "I'll heat water." He carried Ellie up the stairs, her body too light in his arms, her head lolling against his shoulder. The room smelled like dust and old lavender Margaret sachets, still tucked in the dresser drawers. He laid his daughter on the bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin. Her breath came shallow and quick. Her cheeks flushed red against the white pillowcase. Daniel's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Faith appeared in the doorway with a basin of water and clean cloths. She set them on the nightstand and dipped a cloth in the basin, wringing it out, pressing it to Ellie's forehead. "Should I ride for the dock?" Daniel stood at the foot of the bed, fingers gripping the iron rail. "I can make it to town in an hour if I push the horse." "Not yet." Faith didn't look up from Ellie's face. "Sit down. You're wearing a hole in the floor. I can't just..." "Then fetch more water. Make yourself useful." He went, down the stairs, out to the well, the bucket banging against his legs as he cranked the handle. The night air was cool on his face. His breath came too fast. His chest felt like someone had wrapped iron bands around it and was pulling them tighter with every heartbeat. Fever. Margaret had started with a fever. Just a fever. Nothing serious. She'll be fine by morning. And then she wasn't fine. And then she was gone. He hauled the bucket up and carried it inside, water sloshing over the rim, splashing cold on his boots. Faith was still there, still calm, still pressing the cloth to Ellie's forehead with steady hands. See? She glanced at him as he set the bucket down. Still breathing. Told you. Daniel sank into the chair by the window. His legs wouldn't hold him anymore. I seen fever before, Faith said quietly. My brother, when he was young. My pa, more times than I can count. This'll pass. She's strong. You don't know that. No. She dipped the cloth again, wrung it out. But I believe it, and sometimes that's enough. He stayed in the chair, watched Faith work, watched his daughter's chest rise and fall beneath the quilt. The lamp burned low on the nightstand, throwing shadows across the walls. Sometime past midnight, Faith started humming, low and soft, an old hymn Daniel half remembered from childhood. The sound filled the room like smoke, curling into the corners, settling over everything. Ellie's breathing slowed, deepened. The flush in her cheeks faded to pink. Daniel's eyes grew heavy. He fought against sleep, but it pulled him down anyway, Faith's humming following him into the dark. The fever broke before dawn. Daniel woke to gray light and silence. Faith sat slumped in the chair by Ellie's bed, her head resting against the wall, her eyes closed. The basin sat empty on the nightstand. The cloths lay in a pile on the floor. Ellie's eyes fluttered open. She looked at her father, then at Faith, then back again. I'm thirsty, she said. Her voice was hoarse but clear. Daniel's throat closed. He couldn't speak, just nodded and went downstairs to get water. When he came back, Faith was awake, smoothing the quilt over Ellie's legs, checking her forehead with the back of her hand. Fever's gone. She took the cup from Daniel and held it to Ellie's lips. Small sips. That's right. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching his daughter, this woman who had sat up all night with her, the morning light catching the dust motes floating in the air between them. Thank you, he said. Faith looked at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, shadowed with exhaustion. But something in them was steady, unbroken. You'd have done the same. He wasn't sure that was true, but he didn't argue. 3 days later, Daniel went to the barn. The rocking chair sat in the corner where he'd shoved it 2 years ago, covered in dust and old straw. Cobwebs stretched between the arms. A mouse had built a nest in the seat cushion. He pulled it out into the light, brushed off the worst of the dirt, ran his fingers over the carved armrest's dogwood flowers, Margaret's favorite, cut by his own hands the winter before they married. The wood was dry but solid, nothing a little oil couldn't fix. He found sandpaper in his toolbox, started working on the arms, smoothing away the rough spots, the places where the finish had cracked and peeled. The sawdust fell like snow around his boots. He didn't think about why he was doing this. He didn't let himself think at all. When the chair was smooth again, he carried it to the porch, set it in the spot where it used to sit, by the door, facing the fields. The wood gleamed pale in the afternoon light. He went back to the barn, didn't look at it again. "Morning!" Faith stepped onto the porch with her coffee cup, steam rising in the cool air. She stopped. The rocking chair sat where it hadn't sat in 2 years. Sanded clean, oiled smooth, the dogwood flowers on the arms catching the first light of dawn. She didn't move for a long moment, just stood there, cup in hand, staring at it. Then she reached out, touched the armrest with her fingertips, traced the carved petals one by one. She sat down. The chair creaked beneath her weight, rocked once, twice. She settled back, coffee cup cradled in her hands, eyes on the fields going gold with autumn. Daniel came around the corner of the house, stopped, Faith in the chair, his wife's chair, steam rising from her cup. Her face turned toward the morning. She didn't look up. He didn't look away. The chair rocked. The field stretched gold and silent. Somewhere in the house, Samuel laughed at something Ellie said. Daniel walked past to the barn. His boots left prints in the dew. Neither of them spoke. But that night, after supper, he noticed Faith had moved the chair closer to the door, and he noticed that when she sat in it, watching the sunset, she left space on the porch step beside her, space just wide enough for a man to sit. The supply run started wrong and got worse. Faith wore her best dress, the gray one with the mended collar, the one she'd worn to church every Sunday since she arrived. She'd pinned her hair up careful, tucked a sprig of dried lavender behind her ear. Daniel noticed these things without meaning to, noticed the way she smoothed her skirt before climbing onto the wagon seat, noticed the way her hands stayed folded in her lap, still and tight, as they rolled toward town. Bitter Creek spread along the valley floor. Clappered buildings bleached pale by sun and wind. Horses stood tied to rails. Men gathered on porches, talking low, watching the road. Women moved between the dry goods store and the milliner's, baskets on their arms, bonnets shading their faces. Heads turned when Daniel's wagon rolled past. He felt the looks before he saw them, that prickling along the back of his neck. The way conversations paused, then picked up again in lower tones. He kept his eyes forward. Faith kept hers down. The general store smelled like coffee beans and leather and the sharp bite of pickle brine. Daniel handed his list to the man behind the counter, Cobb, thin-faced, mean-eyed, wearing the same stained apron he'd worn for 20 years. Cobb looked at the list, looked at Faith standing by the bolts of calico, looked back at Daniel. "Quite an arrangement you got there. Dan," his voice carried. "Your sister found you a real bargain. Didn't even have to pay shipping on the trunk." Two women by the ribbon display stopped talking. A man examining axe handles glanced over. Faith's knuckles went white on the counter edge. Daniel's jaw tightened. He pulled coins from his pocket, counted them out, slapped them down harder than necessary. "Just ring it up, Cobb." The ride to the church social was silent. Faith stared at the road ahead, her face blank as fresh-washed slate. Daniel wanted to say something. The words stuck in his throat like dry cornmeal. The churchyard spread green beneath the old oaks, tables set up in the shade, women arranging platters of food, Men standing in clusters with cups of lemonade they wished were something stronger. Children ran between the headstones in the cemetery, their laughter thin and bright. Daniel helped Faith down from the wagon. Her hand was cold in his, despite the heat. They separated without speaking. Daniel drifted toward the men ranchers he'd known for years, neighbors who'd helped him bury Margaret, friends who'd stopped coming around when he stopped answering the door. They nodded at him, asked about the harvest, talked about the weather, the price of beef, the new family that had moved into the old Peterson place. Nobody mentioned Faith. Daniel watched her across the yard. She stood by the lemonade table, a cup in her hand, her eyes moving over the clusters of women who somehow never quite included her. They formed circles that closed when she approached, turned shoulders that blocked her out, smiled at her with mouths that never reached their eyes. Mrs. Cutler approached young, pretty, married to the banker's son. Her dress cost more than Daniel made in a month. Her smile showed too many teeth. "You must be the new help at the Sawyer place." She said it loud enough for the women nearby to hear. "Did you have any domestic training, dear? Or did you learn to cook after you had to advertise?" Faith's cup trembled, just barely, just enough. "I learned to cook same as anyone, Mrs. Cutler, from my mother." Her voice stayed level. "Anything else you want to know about my people?" Mrs. Cutler laughed. The women around her didn't. Daniel's feet stayed rooted to the ground. He should walk over, should say something, should... A scream cut through the yard, high and sharp and young. A child's scream. Daniel's head snapped toward the sound. Mrs. Harmon's grandson, Tommy, 7 years old, gap-toothed and freckled, stood in the grass near the cemetery fence, clutching his hand to his chest, tears streaming down his face. A wasp circled near his head, buzzing angry and low. The women scattered. Mrs. Cutler stepped back, her hand pressed to her throat. Mrs. Harmon pushed through the crowd, her face pale, her hands fluttering useless at her sides. Faith moved. She crossed the yard in 3 strides, her good shoes sinking into the soft earth, mud splashing up on her gray hem. She dropped to her knees beside Tommy, took his hand in hers, turned it over. The stinger sat embedded in the meat of his palm, red and swelling. "Hold still." Her voice was calm, steady. She pressed her thumbnail against the skin beside the stinger, scraped it out in one quick motion. Tommy yelped, tried to pull away. Faith held firm. "Almost done. Almost." She grabbed a cloth from the lemonade table, dunked it in the cold water, pressed it against the sting. Tommy's sobs faded to hiccups. His breathing slowed. Mrs. Harmon stood frozen, watching. Faith looked up at her. "Keep the cloth cold. Change it every few minutes. The swelling will go down by morning." She stood, brushed off her muddy skirt, walked back to her place by the lemonade table without another word. The yard was silent, every eye on her. Mrs. Harmon's face shifted. Daniel saw it happen, something moving behind her eyes, some calculation or reassessment that changed the set of her mouth, the angle of her shoulders. She didn't thank Faith, didn't acknowledge what had happened, just gathered Tommy in her arms and carried him toward the shade. But she looked back once, and the look wasn't hostile anymore. It was something else, something Daniel couldn't name. The ride home, was worse than the ride there. Faith sat on her side of the wagon seat, a foot of space between them that felt like miles. Her hands lay folded in her lap. Her face showed nothing. Daniel tried twice to speak. Both times the words died before they reached his lips. They pulled into the yard as the sun touched the western hills. Faith climbed down before he could offer his hand, walked into the house without looking back. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. Daniel sat in the wagon for a long time, watching the light fade from the sky. He woke in the dark to the sound of drawers opening and closing. Soft sounds. Careful. Coming from down the hall, from Faith's room. He lay still, listening. The creak of floorboards, the rustle of fabric, the quiet thump of something being set down. The sounds went on for a long time, then stopped. Daniel stared at the ceiling until gray light crept through the window. Dawn came cold and still. He found her in the kitchen, standing by the door. Her carpet bag sat at her feet, the same bag she'd arrived with, seams still splitting at one corner. She wore her traveling dress, the brown one she'd had on the night he picked her up from the stage depot. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her face was calm. "Don't ask me to stay." Daniel stopped in the doorway. The words hit him like a fist to the chest. "I seen what happens when talk gets going." Her voice was flat, empty. "It don't stop. It gets in your head, in your chest. Makes you wonder if they're right. Makes you look at a person different than you used to." She picked up the bag. "I won't watch that happen to you." Faith. The children are still asleep. She moved toward the door, toward him. He didn't step aside. "Best I go, before they wake. Easier that way." "Where?" His throat was tight. "Where will you go? Does it matter?" He opened his mouth, closed it. She waited, standing there in the gray dawn light, her carpet bag in her hand, waiting for him to say the words that would make her put it down. "Say something," he told himself. "Say anything." But Mrs. Cutler's voice echoed in his head, and Cobb's smirk, and the way the women had turned their shoulders, and the looks on the porch when he'd driven past. He thought about Sunday sermons, sitting in that wagon while everyone else went inside. He thought about Mrs. Harmon asking, "What exactly do you know about her?" He thought about whispers that followed him down the street. He thought about all the years he had left in this town, with these people. After Faith was gone, his mouth stayed shut. Faith nodded, slow, like she'd expected exactly this. "Much obliged for everything, Mr. Sawyer." She stepped past him, through the door, onto the porch. "You've been fair." The screen door closed behind her with a quiet slap. Daniel stood in the kitchen, watching her walk down the steps, watching her start down the road toward town, watching her figure grow smaller against the rising sun. His hands hung at his sides. His boots stayed planted on the floor. He didn't move. He didn't call out. He let her go. The ride to town took an hour. Daniel didn't remember any of it. Faith sat beside him, her carpet bag on her lap, her eyes on the road ahead. The wagon wheels creaked. The horses' hooves beat a steady rhythm on the packed dirt. Neither of them spoke. The stage depot appeared through the morning haze. The coach was already there. Horses stamping, the driver loading a trunk onto the back. Two other passengers waited on the platform, a man in a bowler hat, a woman with a child on her hip. Daniel pulled the wagon to a stop, set the brake. His hands moved through the motions without thought. Faith climbed down before he could move to help her. She stood in the dust, carpet bag in hand, looking up at him. "Much obliged for everything, Mr. Sawyer." Her voice was steady. Her face gave nothing away. "You've been fair." He opened his mouth. No words came. She turned and walked toward the stage. The driver took her bag, helped her up the step, pointed her toward a seat by the window. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap. She didn't look back. The driver climbed up, gathered the reins. "Hiya." The horses lurched forward. The wheels began to turn. Daniel sat in the wagon, watching. The coach pulled away from the depot, kicking up a cloud of dust. It reached the curve in the road, disappeared behind a stand of cottonwoods. Gone. He sat there until the dust settled, until the last sound of wheels faded into nothing, until the depot master came out and asked if he needed something, if he was all right, if he was planning to move his wagon anytime soon because another stage was due in an hour. Daniel picked up the reins, turned the horse toward home. The road stretched empty before him. Ellie was waiting on the porch. She stood with her arms crossed, Samuel beside her, both of them watching the road. When Daniel's wagon appeared over the rise, Ellie's arms dropped to her sides. She ran down the steps, across the yard, stopped at the fence with her fingers wrapped around the top rail. "Where is she?" Daniel climbed down from the wagon. His legs felt strange beneath him, hollow. She had to go. Why? He tied the horse to the post, didn't look at his daughter. "Pa." Her voice cracked. Why? It was her choice. The words tasted like ashes. She wanted to leave. That's a lie. His head snapped up. Ellie stood at the fence, her face red, her eyes wet, her chin jutting out the way Margaret's used to when she was about to say something that couldn't be taken back. "You let her go." Ellie's voice rose. "You didn't even try to make her stay. Ellie, Mama would have tried." The words hit him like a slap. He stood frozen, one hand on the wagon wheel, staring at his daughter. Ellie turned and ran. Up the porch steps, through the door, footsteps pounding on the stairs, a door slammed somewhere above, then silence. Samuel stood alone in the yard, his thumb in his mouth, his eyes moving from the empty road to his father and back again. When is Faith coming back? Daniel's throat closed. When? Pa, when is she coming back? He walked past his son, into the house, up the stairs to his room, closed the door, sat on the edge of his bed with his head in his hands. Below, Samuel asked the question again and again, each time quieter than the last. Then he stopped asking. That was worse. The house ran like a clock without hands. Daniel made breakfast, eggs scorched, coffee too weak, biscuits flat and heavy as stones. The children ate in silence, pushing food around their plates, not looking at him. He fed the chickens, checked the fence, walked the rows of the garden, pulling weeds that didn't need pulling. The tomatoes hung overripe on their stakes, splitting in the heat. Nobody picked them. The rocking chair sat empty on the porch. He couldn't look at it, couldn't walk past without his eyes sliding away, without his chest tightening, without the taste of copper filling his mouth. The second day, he tried to move it back to the barn, got his hands around the armrests, lifted it an inch off the boards, set it back down, walked away. The third day, it rained. Daniel stood at the window, watching water sheet down the glass. The porch was empty. The yard was mud. The road to town had turned to soup. Behind him, the house sat quiet as a tomb. He found the slate on the back porch, where Samuel had left it the day Faith went away. It lay face down on the floorboards, gathering dust. A piece of chalk beside it worn down to a nub. He picked it up, turned it over. Samuel's crooked letters spelled out cat in the center of the slate. Below them, in Faith's careful handwriting, he learned this with joy. Teach him the rest the same way. Daniel's hands shook. His vision blurred. He blinked hard, and water ran down his cheeks. He stood there holding the slate, rain drumming on the roof, the words wavering in front of him. His fingers went numb. The slate slipped, hit the floor with a crack. He didn't pick it up. He walked out the back door, into the rain, across the yard. His boots sank in the mud. He didn't care. He kept walking past the chicken coop, past the garden, past the fence line, until he reached the old oak where Margaret was buried. The headstone was simple, gray granite. Her name, the dates, nothing else, nothing. Daniel stood in front of it, rain soaking through his shirt, mud sucking at his boots. He tried to think of something to say, some prayer, some apology, some explanation for why he'd let another woman leave, why he kept driving people away, why he was so afraid of what the town would think that he'd chosen their good opinion over his boot slipped. He went down hard, landing on his knees in the mud, hands sinking wrist deep in the cold, wet earth. The rain came harder. He stayed there, kneeling in the muck, head bowed, water running down his face. This is what you are, he thought. This is what you've always been. A coward, a fool, a man who lets people leave because it's easier than asking them to stay. He thought about Faith standing in the kitchen doorway, waiting for him to speak, thought about his mouth staying shut, thought about her walking away, her figure growing smaller against the sun, and him just standing there like a post, like a stone, like nothing at all. The rain pounded down. The mud seeped through his trousers, cold against his skin. He knelt there until his knees ached, until his hands went numb, until there was nothing left but a single question. What kind of man lets a woman like that walk away? He looked up at Margaret's headstone. Rain ran down the granite, pooling in the carved letters of her name. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words came out cracked, broken. "I'm so sorry." He didn't know if he was apologizing to her, or to Faith, or to himself. He pushed himself up out of the mud, stood swaying in the rain, covered in filth, looking like something the earth had tried to swallow and spit back out. The house waited beyond the fence line, small and dark and empty. His children were in there, waiting for him to do something, waiting for him to be something other than what he'd been. Daniel started walking. Mud dragged at his boots. Rain beat against his face. He didn't feel any of it. He was halfway to the house when he stopped. Mrs. Harmon's wagon sat in the yard. She stood on his porch, knocking on his door, her black dress dark against the gray sky. She turned when she heard him coming. Her eyes moved over his mud-covered clothes, his soaked shirt, his face. I've been thinking 3 days straight about what I saw her do for Tommy. She shook her head slowly. I was wrong about her, and you're a fool if you let her disappear. Daniel stood in the mud, rain running down his face, Mrs. Harmon's words hanging in the air between them. I was wrong about her, she said again, saw what she did for Tommy at the social, didn't hesitate, didn't ask for thanks, just dropped down in the dirt and took care of him. She pulled her shawl tighter against the rain. That ain't a woman looking for charity. That's a woman who gives it. Daniel's voice came out raw. Why are you telling me this? Because somebody has to. Mrs. Harmon's eyes were hard. Because I spent 2 weeks whispering about her behind her back, and now she's gone. And that's partly on me, but mostly it's on you. She pointed a bony finger at his chest. You stood there in that churchyard and watched those women pick her apart. And you didn't say a word. You let her leave thinking she wasn't worth fighting for. The rain slowed to a drizzle. Daniel's clothes hung heavy on his frame, caked with mud from the knees down. I don't know where she went. Then you better start looking. Mrs. Harmon turned toward her wagon. I asked the depot master which coach she took, and where a woman alone might find decent work. Stage runs south, stops in Cedar Bluff, then on to the border. There's a mission school about 2 days southwest of there. They take in widows, orphans, folks with nowhere else. She climbed up, took the reins, looked back at him one last time. I'll mind the children while you're gone. Don't you be wrong too. Daniel Sawyer, don't you dare. The wagon rolled out of the yard. Daniel watched it disappear down the road, then turned and walked into the house. He didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table, the kerosene lamp burning low, Faith's words playing over and over in his head. Much obliged for everything. Mr. Sawyer, you've been fair, fair. She'd thanked him for being fair, as if that was all she'd hoped for, as if that was enough. He thought about the night on the porch when she'd told him about burying her father, the way her voice had stayed flat, matter of fact, like she'd long since used up all her tears on things that didn't deserve them. He thought about her sitting up all night with Ellie, humming that old hymn, her hands steady while his shook. He thought about the way she'd knelt in the mud at the church social, not caring about her good dress, not thinking about what people would say, just doing what needed to be done. He thought about the rocking chair on the porch, the space she'd left on the step beside her, the way she'd looked at him sometimes when she thought he wasn't watching, like she was waiting for something, like she was hoping. And he thought about himself, standing in the kitchen doorway, mouth shut, letting her walk away. The lamp flickered. The wick was running low. Daniel pushed back from the table, walked upstairs, looked in on the children. Ellie curled tight under her blankets, Samuel's thumb near his mouth even in sleep. They'd lost their mother. Now they'd lost Faith too, because of him. He went to his room, pulled his saddlebag from under the bed, started packing. The horse was saddled before the first gray light touched the sky. Daniel moved quiet through the yard, his boots leaving prints in the mud that was already starting to dry. Mrs. Harmon's wagon appeared on the road just as he cinched the last strap. She climbed down, a basket over her arm, and walked toward the house without looking at him. "I'll tell them where you've gone," she said. "Don't come back without her." Daniel swung up into the saddle. The leather creaked beneath him. He turned the horse toward the road. "Mr. Sawyer." He looked back. Mrs. Harmon stood on the porch steps, her face unreadable in the dawn light. "I come by every day to check on the young'uns since she left. They need her back. You need her back." She paused. "Go." He kicked the horse into a trot. The road stretched endless under the autumn sun. Daniel rode through the first day without stopping, trading his tired horse for a fresh one at a way station outside Bitter Creek. The second day, he reached Cedar Bluff, a dusty collection of buildings clustered around a single well. The stage depot no bigger than his chicken coop. The depot master squinted at him across the counter. Woman traveling alone, brown carpet bag, split seam. "That's her." The man scratched his chin. "Yeah, I remember, quiet, kept to herself, asked about work any place that might need a teacher, a housekeeper, somebody good with children." Daniel's heart pounded against his ribs. "What did you tell her?" "Mission school, 2 days southwest. They take in folks, widows, orphans." He shrugged. "Folks with nowhere else." Daniel was back on his horse before the man finished talking. The mission appeared on the third day, rising out of the desert like something from a fever dream. Adobe walls, baked white by the sun. A wooden cross mounted over the gate, casting a shadow across the dusty courtyard. Children everywhere, thin clothes, bare feet, dark eyes watching Daniel as he dismounted and tied his horse to the rail. His legs nearly buckled when his boots hit the ground. 3 days in the saddle had worn grooves into his thighs, and his back ached like he'd been kicked by a mule. He gripped the rail until his knees stopped shaking. He stood at the gate, hat in hand, scanning the courtyard, and then he saw her. Faith stood near the well. A group of children gathered around her. She held a piece of chalk in one hand, a small slate in the other. Her dress was faded, the same gray dress she'd worn to church, now bleached pale by sun and washing. Her hair was pinned up loose, strands escaping around her face. She was teaching them letters, the same way she'd taught Samuel. Daniel started walking. His boots crunched on the dry ground. The children looked up. Faith's back was to him. One of the children pointed. "Ma'am, there's a man." Faith turned. Her face went still. Not angry, not hopeful, just careful, like she was bracing for something. "Mr. Sawyer." Her voice came out flat. "You're a long way from home." He stopped 5 feet away, close enough to see the chalk dust on her fingers, close enough to see the new lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 3 days ago. "I know." She waited. The children waited. Daniel's hands tightened on his hat brim. The words he'd practiced on the ride, all the speeches, all the explanations dried up in his throat. He stood there in the mission courtyard, covered in 3 days of trail dust, looking at the woman he'd let walk away, and all his pretty words were gone. So he said the truth instead. "I didn't come to ask you back." Her chin lifted. A flash of something hurt defiance crossed her face. "I came to tell you why I let you go." She didn't move, didn't blink. "I was scared." The words came out rough, pulled from somewhere deep. Scared of what folks would say, scared of what the town would think, scared of caring about someone again and losing them the way I lost. He stopped, swallowed, started again. Scared of wanting more than I figured I had coming. The children had gone quiet. Even the wind had died down. I stood in that kitchen and watched you walk away, and I told myself it was easier, told myself it was better for both of us. Lied to myself because looking at the truth hurt too much. He met her eyes. "The truth is, I'm a coward, and you deserved better than what I gave you." Faith's hands were still at her sides. Her face hadn't changed. And now, her voice was quiet, careful as glass. "What do you want now?" Daniel took a breath, let it out slow. "Now I'm just scared of going home without you." The courtyard was silent. A child coughed. Somewhere beyond the walls, a horse whickered. Faith looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes moved over his face, the dust, the exhaustion, the 3-day beard he hadn't bothered to shave. "That's not enough," she said. Daniel's chest tightened. "I know." He took a step closer. "That's why I'm still talking." The children drifted away, called by one of the mission women to help carry water. Faith stood alone by the well, chalk still in her hand, watching Daniel with eyes that gave nothing away. "Why should I believe you won't freeze up again?" The question hit like a fist. Daniel didn't flinch. "I can't promise I won't." Her jaw tightened. "I can promise I'll try harder than I did." He took another step closer. The dust swirled around his boots. "I can promise that if I freeze, I'll thaw out faster. I can promise that when the whispers start, and they will start, I'll say something back. I can promise." "Stop." She held up her hand. The chalk left a white smear on her palm. "Stop promising things you don't know you can keep." Daniel closed his mouth. Faith looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes moved over his face, searching for something a lie, maybe, or a weakness she could use to push him away. He stood still and let her look. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why now? Why not when I asked?" "Because I was stupid and scared and so worried about what the town would think that I forgot to worry about what I would think." He pulled off his hat, turned it in his hands. "I stood at my wife's grave yesterday, knelt in the mud like a fool, and I asked myself what kind of man lets a woman like you walk away." He met her eyes. "I didn't like the answer." The wind picked up, stirring dust across the courtyard. Faith's hair came loose from its pins, strands blowing across her face. She didn't push them back. "That's the first honest thing you've said since I met you." Daniel let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "So what now?" Faith's voice was quiet, careful. "You rode 3 days to tell me you're a coward. You told me. What happens next? That's up to you." She blinked. "What?" "I ain't asking you to come back because I need someone to cook and clean and mind my children." He stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse beating at her throat. "I'm asking you to come back because the house ain't a house anymore. It's just walls. Because my daughter won't look at me and my son stopped asking questions and the rocking chair sits on the porch with nobody in it. And every time I walk past, I think about you sitting there watching the sunset, and His voice cracked. He stopped. Faith stared at him. Her hand had dropped to her side. The chalk fell from her fingers, landing in the dust at her feet. "You kept the chair." "I couldn't move it." The words came out rough. "Tried. Got my hands on it. Lifted it an inch. Put it back down. Walked away." He shook his head. "It's your chair now. Whether you sit in it or not, it's yours." She was quiet for a long time. The wind died down. Somewhere beyond the walls, a horse whickered, a child laughed. "I ain't easy to live with," she said finally. "Didn't ask for easy, just asked for you." Her eyes went bright. She blinked hard, looked away. "The children," she said. Ellie was angry. Samuel was heartbroken. Both of them. Daniel didn't soften it. "Ellie told me her mama would have tried. Samuel kept asking when you were coming back, asked for 2 days straight, then stopped asking." He paused. "That was worse." Faith pressed her hand to her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, then steadied. "I can't promise it'll be perfect," Daniel said. "Can't promise the town will stop talking. Can't promise Mrs. Harmon won't come by with more questions, and Mrs. Cutler won't make more remarks, and Cobb won't smirk at us every time we walk into his store." He reached out, slow and careful, and took her hand. Her fingers were cold despite the heat. "But I can promise I'll be there, standing beside you, not behind you, not letting you face it alone." Faith looked at their hands, his rough and calloused, hers smaller and still dusted with chalk. "You hurt me," she said quietly. "When you let me walk away." "I know. It might take me a while to forget that. I know that too." She looked up at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. "All right," she said. Daniel's heart stopped. "All right. Get my bag." She pulled her hand from his, started walking toward the mission building. "It's in the back room. And tell Sister Agnes I'm leaving." She was halfway across the courtyard before he found his voice. "Faith." She stopped, turned. "Thank you." Something flickered across her face. Not quite a smile. Something better. "Don't thank me yet, Mr. Sawyer. We've got 3 days of riding ahead of us. Plenty of time for you to say something stupid and make me change my mind." They rode out within the hour. 2 horses, 2 saddlebags. The mission children gathered at the gate to watch them go, waving small hands, calling goodbyes that faded into the desert wind. The first day passed mostly in silence. Not the cold silence of the wagon ride to the stage depot, but something easier, something that didn't need filling. They made camp that night by a creek, the water running low but clear. Daniel built a fire while Faith unpacked the food Sister Agnes had pressed into her hands: dried beef, hardtack, apples going soft. They ate without talking, watching the flames. "Your sister," Faith said finally. "The one who wrote to me. You ever tell her I came, wrote her a letter the second week you were there, never sent it?" "Why not?" Daniel poked at the fire with a stick. Sparks rose into the dark sky. "Didn't know what to say. Didn't know what you were yet." He looked at her across the flames. "Didn't know what I wanted you to be." Faith pulled her shawl tighter. "And now I know." She didn't ask what. Maybe she didn't need to. They rode on the next morning, the sun rising hot behind them. Somewhere around midday, Daniel's horse stumbled on a rock, and he swore under his breath a word he hadn't used in years and clapped his hand over his mouth like a boy caught in mischief. Faith laughed. It burst out of her before she could stop it, a snort, then a giggle, then a full laugh that made her cover her mouth with both hands. Her shoulders shook. Her eyes crinkled. She looked 5 years younger. Daniel grinned. It felt strange on his face, unused. "First time I've heard you laugh like that," he said. "First time I've had reason to." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. 3 days on the trail and you're already swearing. Mrs. Harmon's going to have opinions about that. Mrs. Harmon's got opinions about everything. True enough. Faith kicked her horse forward. "Come on. We're burning daylight." The homestead appeared on the third afternoon. It rose from the valley floor like something from a dream, small and weathered, and exactly where Daniel had left it. Smoke rose from the chimney. The windows caught the late sun. The rocking chair sat on the porch, a dark shape against the clapboard wall. Faith pulled her horse to a stop on the ridge. Her breath caught. "It looks different from up here. Looks like home." She turned to look at him. Whatever she saw in his face made her nod, once, and kick her horse forward. They were halfway down the slope when the front door burst open. Samuel came out first, running, stumbling, his short legs pumping through the tall grass. His voice carried up the hill, thin and high and breaking, "Faith, Faith." He reached her before she could dismount. She swung down from the saddle and caught him as he crashed into her legs. His arms wrapping around her waist, his face buried in her skirt. His shoulders shook. He didn't make a sound. Faith knelt in the grass and held him. Ellie appeared on the porch, arms crossed, face hard. She didn't move. Then her arms uncrossed. Her chin trembled. She walked down the steps 1, 2, then broke into a run. She slammed into Faith from the side, nearly knocking her over, and held on like she'd never let go. Daniel dismounted and stood watching. His throat was too tight to speak. Mrs. Harmon appeared in the doorway. She looked at the 4 of them tangled together in the yard, nodded once, and went back inside. Evening came soft and gold. The children were asleep upstairs, worn out from talking, from questions, from the fierce joy of having Faith back in their house. The dishes sat washed and drying on the counter. The lamp burned low in the front window. Faith sat in the rocking chair, a cup of coffee going cold in her hands. Daniel sat on the porch step beside her, a stick and a whittling knife in his lap. He wasn't making anything, just needed something to do with his hands. The chair creaked as Faith rocked, once, twice. "You kept the chair." "Told you I did." "I know." She looked at the fields going dark beyond the fence line. "Just surprised me to see it. Thought maybe you'd moved it back to the barn after I left." Daniel's knife paused. "Couldn't. It was yours by then." The fireflies came out, blinking in the tall grass. The crickets started up, slow at first, then building to a steady chorus. The last light faded from the western sky, leaving only the stars and the lamp in the window. "I ain't saying yes to anything," Faith said quietly. "Not yet." "I ain't asking anything. Not yet." She looked at him. The fireflies blinked between them. "Then what do we do now?" Daniel set down the knife, brushed the wood shavings from his lap. "Now we do tomorrow. The garden needs tending, Samuel needs his lessons. Ellie's been wearing the same dress for 3 days. He looked at her. There's plenty to do. And after tomorrow, then we do the day after that. Faith was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out, slow and careful, and laid her hand over his. Her fingers were warm now, steady. "I can do that," she said. They sat there on the porch, hand in hand, watching the fireflies dance in the darkness. The chair rocked. The lamp burned. The children slept safe upstairs. Tomorrow there would be work. There would be whispers. There would be Mrs. Harmon and Mrs. Cutler and Cobb at the general store. There would be questions without easy answers and silences that stretched too long and moments when the old fear crept back in. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, there was just this: the creak of the chair, the warmth of her hand, the slow fade of light over fields that finally felt like home. There's a quietness that comes after a story like this one, a kind of tenderness that settles somewhere in the chest and doesn't ask to be named. Maybe it stirred something you haven't thought about in a while, an old ache, a face you used to know, a choice you made when you were too young or too scared to make it differently. Many of us have stood where Daniel stood. We've let someone walk away because it was easier than asking them to stay. We've carried the weight of words we didn't say, doors we didn't open, hands we didn't reach for. Some of us are still carrying it now, quietly, the way you carry something you've held so long you forget it's there. It's all right if this story didn't give you answers. Some things aren't meant to be resolved, only witnessed, only felt. You don't have to do anything with what you're feeling right now. You're allowed to simply sit with it, the way you'd sit with an old friend who doesn't need you to speak. "Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening."